Okay, today we're going to be talking about fractional math. This is our ASVAB math knowledge. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and get started. As soon as I remember how to operate this. Yep, okay. So fractions are, a lot of people think that it's easier to do math with decimals because you just have, like 0.44 plus 0.26. Oh, that's just two numbers. You just add them together. That's just, what is that? 0.70. Oh, that's easy. But actually, when you start doing a lot of, especially in the arithmetic reasoning section of the ASVAB, it's going to be a lot easier to work with fractions. But we need to know how first. So go ahead and erase those, because you're not going to have a calculator. And it's way easier to do math with fractions without a calculator than it is to do decimals without a calculator. So the first thing we're going to talk about is addition with fractions. So addition with fractions is really easy. If you have 1/2 plus 1/2, if we think about it on like a pie chart, we've got 1/2 plus another 1/2, and that's the whole thing, equals 1. But the way we actually do this mathematically is, since we have similar denominators, this is the numerator, and this is the denominator. In order to add or subtract with fractions, we have to have a denominator that is the same. So since we have it here, we just add the numerators together. We get 1 plus 1. We get 1 plus 1, which is 2 on the top, and then we keep that same denominator. We don't add these together. This is just 2 over 2, which 2 divided by 2 is 1. That's how that works. So if we have 1/3 plus another 1/3, we just add the numerators together. We have 2, keep the same denominator, we have 2/3. Easy. So what if we have dissimilar denominators that aren't the same? What if we have 1/2 plus 1/3? Well, in this case, we have to figure out what a common denominator between these two. You might have heard this phrase, common denominator, before. And the way we do that is by multiplying the top and the bottom of each of these. Because as long as we keep this relationship the same between each numerator and denominator, it's an equivalent fraction. So we can say 1/2. 1/2 is the same as, if we and the easiest way to do this is by multiplying each one of these by each other. So if we multiply 1/2, that's 1/3. If we multiply 1/2 times 3 over 3, we multiply by this denominator here. We do 1 times 3, and then 2 times 3, which we're getting into the multiplication of fractions now. We just multiply straight across, 1 times 3, and then 2 times 3. We get 3 over 6. And you'll see that this is still 1/2. 3 is half of 6, just like 1 is half of 2. And then we do the same thing over here with 1/3, times that by 2 over 2, because that's our denominator over here, equals 2 over 6. And yeah, that's 1/3. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. So now we can change this equation to be 3 over 6 plus 2 over 6. That's going to give us 5 over 6. And there's our answer. Subtraction is the exact same thing. It's the exact same process. You just, 1/2 minus 1/3 is going to equal 3 over 6 minus 2 over 6. That's going to give you 1 over 6. Same process, Just find the common denominator and go. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit more about multiplying fractions. Whoops. Okay. Now multiplying a fraction is even easier. All you do is you just multiply straight across. So 3 over 4 times 5 over 9. We just multiply 3 times 5 equals 15. 4 times 9 equals 36. And there we go. And then we can reduce this fraction. So if you ever do this and you don't see this answer on your sheet, you might need to reduce your fraction, which we can do because 15 and 36 are both divisible by 3. That would give us 5 over 12. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 36 divided by 3 is 12. So that would be our answer there. Make sure you always reduce your fractions. Okay, now let's talk about division. I know I'm going a little fast here, but there's really not much to say. This is all pretty simple. We'll get into a little bit more complicated stuff here in just a moment. Division with fractions. Now, this is something that I want you to remember. Division of a fraction is the same as multiplication by the reciprocal. And that's an important word. Reciprocal. Because this is going to come up all the time in the arithmetic reasoning section of the test. You're going to have to divide by fractions. You're going to have to divide by percentages and fractions and all kinds of stuff. Now, what a reciprocal is it is literally, it's sort of like a synonym for opposite. So 1/2, the reciprocal of 1/2, and we do reciprocal as this little star in the corner. That's what that means. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. It's literally just flipped it over, which is the same as just saying 2. But the reciprocal of 3/4 is going to be 4 over 3. It's literally you just flip it over. And so to divide by any fraction, it's the same as just multiplying by that reciprocal of that fraction. So 1/2, 1/2 divided by 3 over 4 is the same as saying 1/2 multiplied by 4 over 3. You don't have to flip both of them. You just flip the one on the end. It doesn't matter which one you flip. If one is easier, it's the same thing. And so now this is easy. We just 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. And then we see that these are both divisible by 2. So we divide those by 2, and we get 2/3. Really simple stuff, really easy stuff. It's just about remembering that concept. Multiplication of a fraction is the same as division of a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. Yeah, don't get that confused. So now I wanted to talk about the relationship between percentages and fractions. A percentage and a fraction are essentially the same thing. They are just... Sorry, my mouse is being weird. They're just two different ways of representing the same number. So a few fractions that I want you to know, and you can see my friend is playing Project Zomboid. I should have turned those off, my bad. A few percentages that I want you to know are 1/2 is the same as 50%. That one's pretty obvious. So if they ask you to say, okay, what is 50% of 200? It's the same as saying 200 times 1/2 or 200 divided by 2. Because you see, that's the reciprocal. That's that reciprocal rule in action. And it's all 100. All this is the same way of just saying half of 200. Okay, so But a couple more really useful fractions to remember. Conversions from percentages to fractions is 3 over 4 is 75%. Let's see what else. 1/3 equals 33%. 1/4 equals 25%. And you see that 3/4 is 1/4 times 3. 25 times 3 is 75. All kind of works together. 1/5 is 20%. That's a good one to remember. 1/8 is 12.5%. And you can see, 1/4 divided by 2, half of a 1/4 is 1/8. Half of 25 is 12.5. And then the three that are really important to remember, the three that you can do anything with, are 1/10, which is 10%, 1/5, which is 5%, which, half of 10 is 5, half of 10 is 5, and 1/100th, which is 1%. These three fractions, if you remember these, you can do any percentage of any number really, really easily. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So say that we needed to take, let's do 17%, I'm just making this up right now, of 844. 17% of 844. Well, we know that we can multiply in a calculator. If we wanted to do this, we would just do 844 times 0.17. That's 17% expressed as a decimal. This is how you do this in a calculator. You won't have a calculator on the test, so we're not going to worry about that too much. I don't know what that is. You don't know what that is, probably. If you know that just off the top of your head, that's pretty impressive. You probably don't need this video if you can do that. So, but what I do know is that 17 is the same as saying 10 plus 5 plus 1 plus 1. 10 plus 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, plus another one is 17. It's the same thing with percentages. You can do this with a percentage the same way. So if we figure out, okay, well, what's 10% of 844? That's easy. All we do is for 10%, there's this decimal here. There's this imaginary decimal. It's actually 844.00000 as far as you can possibly go. We just take this decimal point and we just move it 1 over. So 10% of 844 is 84.40. And now 5%, well, 5 is just half of 10, so 5% of this number must be half of this number. 84.4 divided by 2, we can do that in our head. Half of 8 is 4, half of 4 is 2, half of 4 is 2. So that would be 42.20. Okay, so now 1% of something, well, that's the same thing as 10%, but it's 10% of 10%. So we do the same thing we do for the 10%, where we look at this decimal, but we move it over 1, and then move it over 1 more. So 1% is 8.44. And then we have another 8.44. So now all we have to do is add all this up, and this is pretty easy. 84.4 plus 42.2, that's going to give us 126.6. 80 plus 40 is 120. 4 plus 2 is 6. 0.4 plus 0.2 is 6. And then we'll do 8.44 plus 8.44 is going to give us 16.88. And then we just add these two together. 126 plus 16 is going to be 142, and then 142 point, and then 0.60 plus 0.88 is going to be 1.48. So 142 plus 1.48, that's going to give us 143.48. And you can check that with a calculator if you'd like. I'm not going to. I trust my own math. I'm pretty sure I did that right. But now we have this math problem that seemed like it was, impossible to do without a calculator. Just like that, we broke it down into some really easy pieces that we can put together. And that's pretty much what you're going to be doing on the entire arithmetic reasoning section of the exam, is just taking these big pieces and breaking them down into smaller pieces that you can then do really, really easily. And we'll go over that a little bit more some other time. And then one more thing I wanted to go over was that there's another way of doing this. If that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to you, this might work a little bit better. If we wanted to do, let's say 23% of 400. You could do this by finding 1%. If you wanted to break this down even further, 1% of 400, we move this decimal over 2 places, that's just 4. So 1% is 4.00, or just 4. And then you could multiply this by 23, if that's easier for you. So let's do that. 23 times 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Plus 4 times 20 is 80. And we get 92 as our answer. So 23% of 400 is 92. So if that's easier for you, you can do that as well. I personally like, breaking it down into because the more complicated ones, you might have a harder time. If this was 422, then, it's kind of hard to do 4.22 times 23. That's kind of a hard thing to do, but you could do this as, 20%. Plus 1% plus 1% plus 1%. Well, what's 1/5 of 400? That's 400. 400 times 1/5, or 400 divided by 5. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So 400 divided by 5 is 80. So it'd be 80 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. And you see we did pretty much the exact same thing here. 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12, plus 80 is 92. Messed up my box there, but don't worry about that too bad. So it all works together. There's lots of different ways to solve these math problems by just breaking them down into little pieces. So yeah, so that's pretty much what you're going to need to know for fractional math. I would get really good at doing this kind of thing if you're struggling with sort of the end product of a lot of these questions or their percentages. Just remember this reciprocal rule. Definitely, you just flip one of these. This is the reciprocal. 1/2 divided by 3/4 is the same as 1/2 times 4/3. And then you just multiply right across. So yeah, so that's fractional math pretty much.